Okay guys, so about a year ago I came up with a system of 5 tests which I dubbed the standardized testing system. And the purpose of this system or these tests was to test the casting range of any particular reel that I put through the tests. And with the results of this test we can see who the elite reels are. And what I mean by elite reels, reels that can cast lightweights all the way up to heavyweights. Now there's a lot of reels, who can cast lightweights, specialized bait finesse reels. And then there's reels that can cast really heavyweights. Well, pretty much any reel can cast really heavyweights well. But there are a few reels that can do both. And my purpose of this testing was to see which reels were the elite reels. So the first test was the lipless crankbait test, and this lure right here, the Strike King Red Eye Shad, was the lure of choice for a couple of reasons. Now the first reason was that this is available anywhere. You can buy this at Walmart, pretty much anywhere fishing tackle is sold. And the second reason is that this is probably the best-selling, most popular lipless crankbait out on the market. Now there are other lipless crankbaits that cast better than the Red Eye Shad. The Jackal TN is a good example of that, but of course that's a lot more expensive and not as readily available as the Red Eye Shad. So the Red Eye Shad was the first lure that actually I put pretty much all the mainstream reels through, and so far a total of over 22 reels have completed this test. So it's time to get to those results. So here we go. Okay guys, so what we're going to do is we're going to work our way from the bottom all the way to the top. And coming in last place so far, because this is an ongoing test, is the 13 Fishing Concept Z. Now this may be a shocker to a lot of you guys considering the hype about this reel that was generated before it even came out. And this thing averaged 135.3 feet with the Strike King Red Eye Shad. And in case you didn't know, this is the half ounce version. Now to be honest, this thing could have done better, but I set the spool tension according to 13 Fishing's head sponsored YouTuber's suggestion, because obviously the guys at 13 Fishing, they don't think I know what I'm doing. I mean, I only own over 50 baitcast reels, so that's how the spool tension is going to be set for the 13 Fishing Concept Z for here on out. But because of the spool tension being set that way, this thing comes in dead last place. Okay, so next up is the super lightweight, ultra expensive Shimano Aldebaran, and this is the 30 MGL version. And this was not really a surprise to me, and it averaged 137 feet even. Now I say it wasn't a surprise because of how shallow this spool is, and basically that's just the design of this reel. It's not made for heavy lines and super long casts with heavy lures. It's made for lighter weights and finesse fishing. But this thing casts extremely well, and if you saw the video where this thing battled the Bantam MGL, pretty much every cast it casted all the line off of the spool, therefore limiting the distance to only 137 feet. So there we go, the Aldebaran 30 MGL. Okay, so coming up next is kind of a disappointment for me, and that's the Abu Garcia Generation 4 Revo STX. I expected this reel to do a lot better in this test considering the specifications. It's got a light spool, it's got the new braking system, and this thing averaged 143.8 feet. Now the problem for me was that the brakes were just too inconsistent, and something about the casting ergonomics of this thing kind of threw me off. I did the best I could, but in the end, the Revo STX did a disappointing 143.8 feet. Okay guys, so up next is the Daiwa Fuego CT version. And this thing averaged 144.6 feet, which was, I don't know what to say, it was kind of a disappointment. I thought that this thing would at least hit the 150 foot mark average and score some points, but in the end I feel the brakes were just too restrictive on this thing, and it only averaged 144.6 feet. Okay guys, so up next is a reel. This actually either has been replaced or is being replaced by a newer model, and that's the Slews Speed Spool LFS. And this averaged 145.6 feet. Nothing really bad or good to say about it. It performed, I guess, about average, considering this is a budget $99 reel. But like I said, this thing has been replaced or is going to be replaced by the newer model, which I plan to get sometime in the future and test out compared to this old one. But once again, the Slews Speed Spool LFS at 145.6 feet. Okay guys, so moving right along, up next we have the Abu Garcia Revo X. This thing averaged 147.4 feet, and specification wise is very similar to the Speed Spool LFS, and this is probably the best selling $99 Baitcaster out there right now, in my opinion. And strangely enough, this beat out its more expensive bigger brother, the Revo STX. So the Revo X at 147.4 feet. Okay guys, so getting into the reels that broke the 50-yard average, the first reel is the 1.3 Origin C with an average of 150.4 feet. And that absolutely stomped on its older, more expensive brother, the Concept Z, by over 15 feet. Now, the one thing that held this reel back is something that holds all 13 fishing reels back, is its very limited braking system. You only have very few adjustments, and there's no fine tuning other than the spool tension, which I had to really play with to get the most out of this reel. But when I found the sweet spot, it did average 150.4 feet, being the first reel that broke the 50-yard average. Okay, so up next is a reel that is a favorite amongst the Daiwa fans, and a reel that's kind of a casting enigma to me, and that is the Daiwa Tatula SV. And as you can see, I have the JDM model. This thing averaged 151 feet even. Now I say this is an enigma because it casts certain things very well, then it casts certain things mediocre. But yeah, 151 feet for the Daiwa Tatula SV. Okay, so coming in ahead of the much vaunted Tatula SV is the underdog of this test, in my opinion, and that is the Quantum Accurist PT. And this thing averaged 152 feet even, and I think it did that because it has a lot of good attributes for long casting. It's got a really tall spool. I believe it's either, I think it's 35 millimeter, and it's got super adjustable brakes that allow you to fine tune and get every last ounce of casting performance out of this reel. Now this reel is actually being replaced, just like the Slews Speed Spool LFS, by a newer model that only has, I believe, centrifugal brakes, and I'm very, very interested in testing out a Quantum with the externally adjustable centrifugal brakes. But once again, the Accurist PT is a very good 152 feet even. Okay guys, so next up is the longest casting Daiwa in the test so far. And that is the very underrated, I believe, Daiwa Tatula CT Type R. Now, this thing averaged 153.4 feet, but I'm gonna have to say I was very disappointed with it in this particular test. I spent over 45 minutes trying to dial this reel in just to get it to cast over 150 feet. I had to fool around with the spool tension, I had to fool around with the MagForce Z, and I think ultimately what held it back was the MagForce Z brakes. This thing's got a really lightweight spool, so I expected to, you know, come pretty close to the Shimano Corrado K, which is its main rival, but unfortunately it didn't. Now this thing is currently being phased out. It's on clearance now. I think its replacement is that new Tatula 100 with the newer, smaller body. But I will say this, if I had the choice between this and the Tatula SV, I would pick the Tatula Type R. Once again, it comes in at 153.4 feet. Okay guys, so up next is the Shimano Corrado 70. And this thing averaged 155.8 feet. And unlike the Aldebaran 30 MGL, the spool capacity on this thing is deep enough to hold enough 12-pound line to be able to bomb out the red-eye shad. But just like the Aldebaran 30, it does have a very small spool compared to the other reels in this test at 32 millimeters, so that kind of hindered its performance. But it did a very respectable 155.8 feet. So beating out its main rival, the Tatula SV, by about 4 feet. Okay, so up next is a reel that we haven't seen in a while, and that is the brand new Luz BB1 Pro. And this is the updated version with the aluminum handle and the power knobs. And this thing averaged 156 feet even, beating out the Corrado 70. Now this thing is made for super long casts because it's got a really tall spool at, I believe, 35 millimeters, and it's got a really deep spool. But that spool also is probably, in my opinion, what held it back from casting even longer, because it's got the heaviest spool in the test by far and the deepest spool. So when you load this thing up with line, you're looking at a super heavy spool that's going to ultimately limit how fast the spool is spinning when casting even a lipless crankbait. So I don't know how this thing is going to fare in the lighter weights, but we're just going to have to see. But once again, the new updated Luz BB1 Pro at 156 feet even. Okay guys, so up next, barely beating out the BB1 Pro, is the Shimano Bantam MGL. And this thing averaged 156.6 feet, which is pretty good. A lot of people don't like the fact that the line guide is so close to the spool compared to other reels, but it does have that cone-shaped, big tapered line guide that the Antares DC has. I don't know if you guys can see that there. And it's also got, of course, the MGL spool and the new SVS Infinity brakes, which allowed it to cast 156.6 feet. Okay, so the next reel is the Chronarch MGL. And this thing averaged 159 feet even. And of course that is due to the excellent MGL spool and the new Shimano SVS Infinity brakes. That beats out the Bantam MGL by about a yard. And I believe this is a very underrated reel and overlooked reel in Shimano's lineup. It's probably the best performing reel at 300 and under that price point, with the exception of a few JDM reels. So once again, the Chronarch MGL. Okay guys, so next up is the mighty Metanium MGL. A reel that no other reel has been able to touch in the 1/4 ounce casting plug distance test. Now this thing barely beat out the Chronarch MGL with an average of 159.2 feet. And also keep in mind, this is the JDM version, has the 70 capacity spool, while the American version has the 150 capacity spool, just like the Chronarch. So I'm not sure if that would have made a difference with this particular reel, because it does have, you know, the cone shaped line guide, and the spool is a little bit lighter. To be honest, I thought this would do better than 159 feet, but on that particular day, it just couldn't do better. Once again, the Metanium MGL. Okay guys, so this next reel is probably going to come as a huge shock to anyone who doesn't actually own this reel. And coming in next is the Shimano Casitas 150 at 161.6 feet. So this thing comfortably beat out all the expensive MGL reels. Now if you own this reel, this may not come as a surprise to you, because you know this thing is a bomb caster. It's got a super lightweight spool, the lightest by far in the $99 Baitcaster class. And of course, Shimano gave it the excellent SVS Infinity brakes to really fine-tune its casting ability. And once you've understood how these brakes work, this thing will just launch lures out there, as you can see. Now, unfortunately, Shimano is going to be discontinuing these, I heard, in favor of the new SLX that's going to be coming out sometime in December. So if you want one of these reels, get them while you can. It's probably one of the biggest performance bargains in a long time. The Shimano Casitas 150. Okay guys, so next up is the highest placing MGL reel so far in the test, and that is the Casitas MGL, which is a JDM only model. Now surprisingly, the cheapest MGL by far is the farthest casting MGL, at least in this particular test. This thing averaged 164 feet even, so it comfortably beat out all the other much more expensive MGL reels. And it even beat out its US domestic market brother, the Casitas 150. And that of course is down to its super lightweight 100 capacity MGL spool. I believe the only MGL spool that's lighter than this one is the Metanium MGL. So I don't know why this thing casted better than the other MGLs. Now in the original battle video, the Casitas couldn't complete the test because the lure broke off, but it was well on its way to at least equaling those other reels from the practice cast that I could remember. So once again, the JDM Casitas MGL at 164 feet. Okay, so next up is the Corrado 200K. This reel's kind of gotten lost in the shuffle with all the hoopla about the Corrado DC, but for the longest time this reel was untouched at the very top of the standings at 168.4 feet. And I really don't know why it casts these particular lures so well. Maybe it's just a combination of things, but it's got, you know, a huge line capacity, fairly lightweight spool, kind of, you know, average for its price class. For some reason this thing just bombs out the striking red-eye shads really far, and it was only dethroned recently when I tested these last 4 reels. Okay guys, so beating out its non-DC brother was the Corrado DC with an average of 177.4 feet, which was kind of surprising to me because of the spool control issues, but I think I finally understand the braking system, and I'm going to take this thing out fishing pretty soon and see how it performs in real fishing conditions. But this thing once again averaged 177.4 feet, so easily beating out its older brother, the Corrado K, and earning its much hype reputation, unlike the Concept Z. So once again, Corrado DC coming in 4th place at 177.4 feet. Okay guys, so we're getting to the top 3, and coming in 3rd place is the sinister Scorpion DC, the Darth Vader of baitcasters, with its deep shiny black paint job. This thing barely beat out the Corrado DC by 2 feet with an average of 179.4 feet, and that's due to its much more adjustable brakes and much more controllable brakes, in my opinion. Spool control on this thing is noticeably better than on the Corrado DC, and you can actually run this thing with spool tension set to how Shimano recommends it. So once again, the Scorpion DC, probably the performance bargain of the moment. So I guess it's only fitting that the second most expensive reel here came in 2nd place, and that is the Mighty Metanium DC. And this thing averaged 181.6 feet, so it was a couple of feet longer than the Scorpion DC. And yeah, this shows you what DC technology is all about. Now this thing went to battle up against the Metanium MGL throwing casting plugs, and it was soundly beaten. But when you throw a real lure, the tables were turned, and this thing soundly beat the Metanium MGL by over 20 feet in this test. And granted, they weren't done on the same day, but the conditions were fairly similar. But yeah, once again, the Metanium DC at 181.6 feet. Okay, so finally we get to the number 1 position, and fittingly so, it belongs to the most expensive reel here by far, and that is the Shimano Antares DC, the 2016 version. Now when I first casted this reel, I was very disappointed, and I just packed it up and just let it sit there on punishment duty in its box for months. But when I took it out and battled it up against the other DC reels, it did not disappoint. Now it averaged 184.2 feet. Now it didn't really just stomp everyone out by 20 feet, but the reason is that the weight of this lipless crank was not enough to really push the DC brakes to the limit. There's a lot more casting performance left in this reel if you put on heavier weights. So the current king so far of the half-ounce lipless crankbait test is the 2016 Shimano Antares DC. Okay, so for all you old school DC fans, we have some unofficial honorable mentions. And I say unofficial because I chose not to publish the video because the casting footage wound up looking like this. So with that pretty awful casting footage, I decided to scrap that video and not publish it, but I'll go over the results. Now the Exyns DC, I believe, averaged about 157 or 158 feet, while the Calais DC averaged 168 feet. So the old king, the Calais DC, still's got a lot of fight left in it, and it pretty much outcasted all other reels except for a few. So guys, there we go. 22 official tested reels done and in the books. And I actually plan on continuing this test as I get new reels. It's going to be an ongoing thing. So yeah, there we go. Now the second stage of the standardized testing system that's going to be completed next is going to be the Senko battle. I just need to test the MGL and the DC reels to complete that. Okay guys, thanks a lot.
Siege, Riley, Taz, yeah. Set me free, give me death, there ain't no other choices. When I lay down and go to sleep, I keep on hearing voices. Little whispers in my head, man, is you fake or loyal? Why nobody that the sign of baby, pick your poison. These little demons living underneath my brain creeping. Know the real, my lips above them all sleeping. That subtle breathing in your closet every single evening. Thought you never see me again, this can be deceiving. When they hear the sound of the drum, they'll be saying, oh Lord, here they come. Yeah, here we come. Here we come. Here we come. Here we come.